Three, two, one, and go. Okay, great. So, hello everyone, wherever you are and whenever you are. This is Mohammed Nabil, the founder of Videocast International. And today we have Dylan Gates, the renowned teacher trainer. And today is going to talk about creating many tasks for unplugged moments. So, everyone, for those who are joining us today, that's the fifth webinar of the annual series of webinars in Ramadan, organized by Educast. And yes, hello, Dylan. How are you doing?
Hi, Mohammed. I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, good to be here. Looking forward to talking about dogma and unplugged and task-based language teaching.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for accepting my invitation, and I'm really looking forward to listening to this.
Great, great.
Thank you. Okay, so you're ready to start?
Yeah, I think so. Just to let everyone know, I've got an allergy problem at the moment. So if I turn the camera off and start sneezing, don't be worried. It's just that one
It's
of
fine.
those things.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So I can start if you like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So let me introduce myself just very quickly. My name's Dylan Gates. I've got a master's in applied linguistics, a Delta, and various other qualifications. I've been teaching English or training. I've been in the English language teaching sector for about 25 years. Teacher educator, business English trainer, been an examiner, learning designer, director of studies, EAP lecturer. I've done lots of things. Maybe I'm a jack of all trades, but perhaps specialist of none. But I enjoy the variety. And so this is going to be a talk about dogma or unplugged. And in particular, I'm going to focus on this question when we're in the classroom and something happens, something unexpected. Do we go with the plan or do we go with the flow? Okay. Often we might do both. In fact, most of the time we probably have a plan, but we try to find these moments, these, as Scott Thornberry calls them, dogma moments in the lesson where we can do something maybe a bit more spontaneous, creative, and based around what really happens in the language classroom. So just to begin, I have three quotes which I'm going to read out. The first one is, unplanned situations or unstructured activities can sometimes create more effective, natural, and memorable communicative opportunities than well-planned communication activities. So if you want to, in the chat, you can tell me if you strongly agree, if you partially agree, if you disagree, if you completely disagree with that quotation. Okay, so Shaima agrees. Great. Mohammed agrees. Salma partially agrees. Great. So these will happen. Unplanned situations will always happen. So we will have to deal with them, I think, whether we feel comfortable doing that or not. I think it's part of our growth as educators. The second one, it's about learning affordances, otherwise known as opportunities, perhaps. So here's another quotation. They're often the opposite of problems. They are opportunities for solution or resolution, for learner-initiated focus on form, or for questions that may reveal more about a learner's actual needs in relation to what is being taught than the learning outcomes or perhaps objectives on the front of a lesson plan. So again, if you'd like to, in the chat, comment on whether you strongly agree, disagree, if you have any feelings on that topic. Okay, and the third quotation or quote, and Salma agrees there. It's one about what we call naturally occurring talk. It's a sufficiently fertile context for language development, obviating the need for the somewhat artificial and cumbersome tasks associated with a task-based approach. And this is something that I'm quite interested in because in my context, which mainly is working with business professionals, adult professionals, they like to keep things spontaneous. And so if the tasks are too structured, sometimes they're appreciated, but sometimes they don't work so well. So perhaps having these very flexible, kind of spontaneous, very loose tasks based around conversation and what is talked about in the classroom might be more effective than more structured tasks. So again, if you want to comment, please go ahead. These quotes are just here basically to get you thinking about the topic. And this one, of course, was from Meddings and Thornbury from their Teaching Unplugged book, which if you don't know a lot about dogma and teaching unplugged, then I definitely recommend. So what I'll be looking at today, we'll be exploring and reflecting on things like planned activities versus unplanned events or occurrences in the classroom, learning outcomes or perhaps objectives against learning opportunities. And we'll be maybe comparing and contrasting task-based language teaching with dogma, unplugged, and perhaps talking about whether we can integrate them, combine them, fuse them, mix them, however you want to put it. So I have an image on the screen now. Based on what I've been talking about so far, does anyone have any idea what this image might represent? Okay, well, it's a swimming pool, an unplanned moment. Yeah, safety. Right. Okay, these are all very relevant, definitely. And safety in particular, I think, is interesting. I chose this because it basically refers to what we call a deep end approach to language teaching, language training, language learning. Yeah, surface and dig into deep. Yeah, and a deep end approach we might contrast with a more structured approach. So, for example, in a traditional PPP type lesson, you, the teacher, have an idea of what you're going to teach, and you're really going to focus perhaps on that structure, a grammatical structure, or specific pre-selected lexis, vocabulary items. And with the deep end approach, it's more like, okay, let's see what you can do. So you may have heard of TTT, test, teach, test. Well, deep end approaches are related to that as well. You either set a conversation, you start talking about something, or you set a task, and based on what the learners do, you react to that, and that basically provides you with a lot of the rest of the content and the approach of your teaching. So it's risky, which is interesting why you said about safety, because things can go wrong because maybe you're not so prepared. But perhaps it's a more natural, spontaneous, fluid way of teaching that's more learner centered, and it's based around what the learners actually produce. So you may have heard of dogma. Scott Thornbury is he's kind of the godfather of dogma, and it's based on three key principles: conversation text driven, materials light, and focus on emergent language. If you're not clear with those terms, please feel free to write something in the chat and I'm happy to explain in a bit more detail. Great. And emergent language contrasts with target language. Target language, the language we choose to teach, we're prepared to teach, we've selected to teach in the lesson, like the second conditional or 5 verbs related to cooking. And emergent language is what happens when the learners start using language to communicate in some way. So again, it is risky because you don't know what they're going to come up with. Yeah, unplanned language and teaching. That's the key point. Task-based learning, there are lots of different task-based learning models, and what is a task is a question that's been discussed for 20 years or so now. here's a definition I like from Anderson and McCutcheon in their book, Activities for Task-Based Learning. Tasks should be purposeful and engage your students in real communication, by which we mean that other participants in the task will have a genuine reason to listen to whoever is speaking. So I think that encapsulates a lot of what we do in communicative language teaching. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, and this is going to be the theme of this presentation, of this workshop: go with the plan or go with the flow. We have to make a choice many times in every class. I think I read teachers make something like 250 decisions in every lesson. So that's pretty incredible when you think about it. And Shima, exactly. And it does depend. I think we've always got to think about the context. If, for example, we're teaching an exam class and maybe the learner's got an exam very soon and they really need specific training in something, it probably makes sense to have a plan. If they're more interested in learning how to communicate naturally or do a task, well, we might have more of a go with the flow attitude there. But all of us are restricted in some ways in our language classroom. So I've got a few examples here. We might be required to use a course book, and maybe we don't really think the course book is particularly appropriate for our learners. We might be asked to deliver the classes in a certain way, like standing in front of the board, presenting, talking, which we might not think it's particularly appropriate for the communicative language classroom. We might have a curriculum. We might be using technology that we're expected to follow. Online training obviously has its challenges because people are never as fully involved as they might be in the face-to-face physical classroom. And maybe it might be that we're training our learners or preparing them for a test. So again, we're constricted by the demands of the test, and we tend to teach to the test. But I think all of us know that there are moments where we can be a bit more natural, a bit more creative, have real communication, and just basically deal with what happens in the room, in the interaction between the learners and you, the teacher, or between the learners themselves. So all these things would just emerge naturally based on what's happening in our learners' lives. So I'm going to start by telling you a little anecdote, basically, about something that changed my approach. And many years ago, about 15, 20 years ago, I was working in a school in central London, and we generally use course books. And I was teaching a business English class. And so we had a business English course book, which we were going through. And honestly, at that point, I was very much that sort of teacher. Okay, everyone, let's turn to page 49. Let's start with exercise 1. So that's the approach I think I took back then. But this changed. It's one of those critical incidents, which really change how you feel about your profession as a learner. And it all happened because I was teaching this class. It was a business English class, relatively early in the morning. And one of the learners came in. I remember his name. He was Pepe, and Pepe was a little late. And he came in and he looked terrible. He looked really, really tired and not particularly happy. And I said, "Hi, Pepe, how are you?" And he said, "Not good, teacher." So naturally I said, "Why? What's the problem?" And he said, "I woke up late. I didn't have any breakfast." Now, apologies for all of you who are in the middle of Ramadan, but I'm going to talk about food for a while because this was the incident that happened. And this was a business English class. And until then, it hadn't been going particularly well because I felt that, well, the learners were serious and they worked hard, they paid attention. I didn't have any problems with classroom management, but I didn't really feel that they were so happy with what I was doing. And I hadn't really built up this great rapport with them. And they hadn't really gelled together as a group either. They were sort of, thank you, Shima. And they weren't basically working so well. They weren't communicating so well as a group. But as soon as Pepe said this, suddenly they all started talking and asking him why he didn't eat breakfast, if he normally ate breakfast, what he normally ate for breakfast, why they had to have breakfast, their favorite breakfast. For the first time, they were really engaged. They were conversing. They were from lots of different countries. It was a multinational group. And I thought, wow, this is the most engaged I've seen them. And so again, I had this decision to make. Did I go with the plan and I'd prepared my lesson? Or did I go with the flow? And so I thought, well, they're communicating. They seem to be having a good time. Let's let it run on for a few more minutes. And so what I realized was that basically everyone has something to say about breakfast. Even these business English professionals, they also wanted to talk about breakfast. And if you teach business English, you realize that small talk and social language is really, really important. So I let them continue, and they sort of formed little groups, and I walked around the groups. There were about 15 learners, if I remember correctly. It was quite a big group. And as I was walking around, I realized all of these things were happening. They were recycling language we'd used in previous lessons. There was all this functional language. They were giving each other advice. They were talking about their opinions, disagreeing with each other, everything like that. They were reformulating each other's language. And often I would step in and do a bit of reformulation as well, using a really wide range of grammar structures. All of these things we'd been teaching in the grammar element of this business English syllabus, they were being used naturally and fairly well. They were negotiating meaning when things weren't clear and they needed to ask for clarification. There was even some error correction, some discreet, polite error correction going on. And of course, I could do some of that. The language was extending. They were learning from each other. All of these lexical items were being used. I was hearing lexical chunks and phrases. They were supporting each other. If they didn't know the right word, then they were helping each other. There was mediation going on. One Spanish student said to his Colombian friend, "How do you say this?" Gave the Spanish word. The Colombian friend translated into English. Pronunciation work, I could help with that. And some of the stronger students were helping each other there. And basically, it turned into kind of an example of instructional conversation, where you have this topic and you, the teacher, are guiding and prompting and kind of making it a bit more structured and a bit more educational. Instructional conversation, if you haven't heard this term, I have a definition here. It allows students to construct their own meanings with the teacher as a guide, asking questions that help students develop deep understanding that's based on their knowledge and prior experience. Instead of asking questions with known answers, you're not testing their answers all the time. The teacher asks open-ended questions that allow for interpretation and shape the conversation in a way that's both productive and creative. So I found that I was doing this quite naturally, and later on, I realized there was a word for it, instructional conversations, and we were using real questions as opposed to those display questions we often use, which are just used to test our learners' knowledge. And the language was emerging. And if you're not so familiar with emergent language, I thought of this nice acronym, which is user. So U is for upgrade. Our learner says something and you think there's a better, more natural way to say that. Sharing. One learner says something, you think this would be great for the whole group. Extending. So there might be a similar word, a synonym you could use, or an antonym, or maybe there's a language pattern that you can actually identify and share with the learners. And of course, reformulating. So that's what we do with emergent language. User, upgrade, share, extend, and reformulate. And this was great. I was really enjoying this, and the learners were really engaged and motivated. And I got the impression they were learning and they were really communicating, just talking about breakfast in a business English class. And then I thought, Oh, sorry, this is a nice quote. Today's emergent language is tomorrow's target language. So what the great thing about emergent language, it often prepares us for our forthcoming lessons, upcoming lessons. But as I was saying, I sensed that they were enjoying the conversation, but it was starting to peter out, starting to drift away. And I thought, okay, although it's working, they're producing meaningful and real communication. I felt that I could do something else, change the activity, or, and I had to decide: do I go back to my plan, back to page 48 of the course book, which was writing reports or how to negotiate in English, whatever it was, or go with the flow? And again, I thought, I'm going to risk it. I thought I had an idea. An idea was forming in my head around a task based around breakfast, but more kind of business focused. And so I thought of a task. Now, maybe if you're here at the moment, imagine you're in this context. You have a business English class. You've spent 15 minutes talking about breakfast, and they've been sharing their opinions about breakfast. And then you think, is there a task I could do that's related to breakfast and also suitable for a business English class? So if you want to, in the chat box, if you've got any ideas, please share them before I tell you what I did. So I'm putting you on the spot here. Maybe you've got a few ideas. Okay, well, here's what I did. And this was my task. I thought, okay, you're a catering company. You're bidding to provide breakfast meals to a company for their work canteen. So you've got this big company with lots of workers. They've decided to have a canteen. So they want someone, a catering company, to take charge of the breakfast. Okay, it's more business related. Great. We've got a few ideas there. Najwa, a plan to open a restaurant. Fantastic. Budgeting your food. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we as teachers, experienced teachers, we often have so many ideas. And sometimes it's great if we feel confident enough to actually go with that idea and create kind of a spontaneous task, which doesn't really require much preparation. So that's what I did. I put them into small groups and I thought, okay, I asked them to think of a breakfast menu and then think about how they would present it as an elevator pitch, a 1 minute presentation to maybe the CEO of the company, a food truck project. Thank you, Najwa. That's another great idea. But this is what we did. So I gave them presentation skills. They could actually create a little presentation to sell their offer of providing a catering service to this company. And I did it as a mini task, really. I just gave them 5 minutes to do that. Great. We got some good ideas here. But the great thing about these mini tasks is that they might actually extend into a larger or longer task. So you could really work on presentation skills, creating a bid. It could be the whole lesson. In fact, it could even, as some of you suggested, you could even make it into a mini project where the business English learners could form a company, a catering company, and then create the publicity for that company, a presentation, whatever it is. So these things can grow, which is what I love about starting with a conversation, moving on to a mini task, and then seeing where it goes after that. So this is basically what happened. I started out with a simple conversation that just emerged because Pepe hadn't eaten breakfast that morning, and then sort of turned into an instructional conversation. So some learning actually took place. And then I was able to take that conversation as a springboard for a task, okay, related to the contexts, the needs, the interests, the wants of the learners I had in front of me. And I was lucky I had the flexibility to do that But even if you have to follow a stricter syllabus, if you can find 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes just to do these mini tasks, and they really energize the learners, they engage the learners, and often they will be naturally using a lot of the language that's on the syllabus anyway. Now, you may be thinking, and this is when I've talked to this with a lot of about this approach with a lot of teachers, well, they have a problem. And the problem is a lot of teachers think, but in this moment, I know the conversation is interesting, the topic's interesting, but how can I think of a task on the spot, spontaneously? So again, I'm going to throw this question out to you all. How many of you are confident with just spontaneously on the spot creating a task based on something the students were talking about, an emergent conversation? Would you feel confident? Do you think you'll be able to do that? So again, if you want to comment in the chat, if you feel it's something that you could do. Riham, yeah, due to experience. Yeah, great. Sarah, you too. So my next question is, how do we get this experience at creating tasks spontaneously? Yep. You think about the topic deeply, definitely. But this, I think, is a really interesting topic about any sort of deep end approach to teaching, whether it's dogma, unplugged, or task-based learning, and dealing with emergent language. Yeah, preparation takes a long time, maybe, but you learn from your previous classes, Riham. Exactly. Yeah. You learn through experience. And often we need to be in this situation where we're put on the spot and we're required to think of something on the spot. And I think that helps us sort of develop our creative skills and our creative muscles, if you like. I think we need to go through that experience to realize, yeah, we can do it and we can get better at doing it. But also, it often helps teachers. Role plays, exactly. Role plays are a great way, I think, of developing these improvisational skills. I think as teachers, we also benefit from structure, and some people are very happy with flexibility, and some maybe people they need a bit more structure. They need the plan, even experienced teachers, or they need to prepare something. They need to have something that just makes them feel a bit more confident. So I thought about this, and then I remembered from task-based language teaching, Jane Willis has this taxonomy categorization of 6 types of task. Does anyone remember, or is anyone familiar with Willis's 6 tasks? Again, if you think you know, maybe you could put them in the chat. Well, one of them, listing task. You know, even something as simple as walk around the room, speak to the other learners, and then create a list of different types of breakfast, things they ate this morning for breakfast. That could be a genuine communicative task for a lower level. Ordering and sorting. Okay, so this could be related, for example, to categorizing different types of breakfast, putting different steps in order for cooking. Great. We have brainstorming and matching. Yeah, they're related. They're related. They're not actually in Willis's taxonomy, but that's what happens. Comparing, I think that's the next one. There we are. Yeah. So if you're working in a multinational class with students from all around the world, this is perfect. It's just a really normal way of finding information. There's a There's an information gap there, and you learn about intercultural differences at the same time. You've got it, Mohammed, 6 types of task. So problem solving, sharing personal experiences, and creative tasks. And so just having these 6 types of tasks in mind, I think helps a lot of us because we can just have it by our computer or just remember it and think, okay, I can do basically these, I can create a task on the spot using one of these categories. It makes things a lot easier. So I'd like you now to think of this context. Okay, so it's teaching business English learners. The topic is breakfasts. And can you think of some just simple tasks based on those categories that you could do with your learners? Some mini tasks. Let's brainstorm some task ideas. Great. Types of different food for breakfast. And you could do that with any level, obviously, because even with higher levels, they might be more sophisticated in the language they're using. Any other ideas? Perfect. Comparing different breakfast dishes from around the world. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, to deliver the food was kidnapped or stolen. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a great mini task. Yeah. What would the strategy be if that happened? Any other ideas? Absolutely. Yeah. Best breakfast experiences. Yeah. It's a really simple task. It's something people might talk about. Great. A breakfast you'll never forget. Yeah. See, the idea is once you start thinking, I think, the ideas start flowing. You open the gate and exactly, it's personalized. So here are a few of my ideas. Ah, yeah. You've got the students in the classroom. If you've got Indian students and Korean students, compare, contrast. Absolutely. So here are my ideas. They're very simple ideas, nothing groundbreaking. And here are the 6 categories. So if you just quickly want to try to match the categories with the idea, obviously the first one's really easy. There we are. Which one do you think is the ordering and sorting activity? Yeah, it could be the breakfast menu, and a few of these overlap actually. I was thinking personally the instructions one because you might have to order the different stages, but it could be others as well. What about comparing? That one's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's that one down there. Nutritional value, which one is healthy? Problem solving. I think there's 2 which maybe could fall under the topic of problem solving. But this could be one. Your guest is gluten intolerant. Sharing personal experiences. Yeah, it's that one. And a creative task. Yeah, really easy. So as you can see, these are basic tasks, nothing particularly outstanding in many ways, but they're normal tasks. The learners, I think, would be engaged, gives them a real purpose. They're interactive, they can personalize them, and you as the teacher can then do a lot of emergent language work and really react to the language they produce. And of course, depending on your context, you could adapt them quite easily. Great. Okay. Sorry, just one moment. I'm just going to try to clear the screen. There we are. And of course, this is an approach I've been doing for a few years. And then about a year ago or a year and a half ago, suddenly we had ChatGPT and just made things maybe a lot easier. And if you've got access to ChatGPT in your classroom, it's something you could do in a moment, perhaps. So I had, an idea, and people have taken this idea and developed it. They've started doing much more sophisticated things with it, but it was very simple. I just thought, okay, I can create a mini task prompt generator, and just using ChatGPT, choose a topic, decide which type of tasks you want to use with your learners, and you decide a mini task based on a prompt. And what I did is I just basically asked ChatGPT, I said, you're a business English trainer, you want to do a lesson on breakfast, you want to think of some mini tasks, you would like to use Jane Willis's 6 types of task as the framework, can you think of some ideas? And here's some they came up with. So of course, you could easily adapt them, but ChatGPT can do that in a moment. And if nothing else, if you draw a blank when it comes to think of an idea, it will give you that inspiration, I think. What do you think? Are there any of those you might consider doing with your learners? Thank you, Shahanda. Yeah, it's really interesting how quickly you can create these tasks. And again, depending on your context, do you want to make them mini tasks, just 5, 10, 15-minute kind of nice, fun activities, or you could extend them into longer tasks and perhaps even projects at some point, or combine them and create sort of a project based on several different tasks. So to summarize, it's not that difficult, really, I think, to plan these or create these spontaneous tasks based on conversation in the classroom. You can do it yourself. I'm happy to share a PDF with my mini task generator, but honestly, if you've got access to any sort of an AI tool, you could probably, within a few minutes, create your own mini task generator. And then, in the classroom, you let these conversations flow and think, this is an interesting conversation. It's an interesting topic. Maybe I could, first of all, have an instructional conversation with this topic and then transition into a mini task. But it's up to you to spot those opportunities. And I think having a framework like Jane Willis's 6 type of tasks helps you just be more aware of those opportunities and think, I can take advantage of this. I see this opportunity and I can see a 10, 15, 20-minute activity or task that could grow naturally from this conversation. So comes back to the old question, do we go with the plan? Do we go with the flow? It depends. But I think we've always got to have room in our lessons, room in our classroom for unplanned, spontaneous, emergent conversations and language and tasks that basically the learners often generate just from their personal lives or their professional lives or what's going on in their lives at any moment. And I think learners really appreciate that. They really like, I think, you know, that knowledge that you're able to take something that has happened in their life and create something really useful, practical, and communicative from it. I'll leave you with a quotation from Bruce Lee. And he had this idea of basically you be water. So basically, you go with the flow, you adapt to what's happening in the classroom. And I think all of us as teachers, we need to make sure we're able to do this. Maybe not always, of course, not always. We do have to follow our plan and our syllabus, but there are always moments where we can really go with the flow in these sessions. So I'm happy to take any of your questions now, if you have any. Okay. Just one moment. Okay. I think I've just made you host there.
Yep. Thank
Great.
you. That this was wonderful and very informative, Dylan.
Mhm.
So everyone, if you have any questions to Dylan, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. So Dylan was talking about dealing with emergent language, emergent or unplanned situations, and creating many tasks for these situations. And he always focused on the part that it doesn't have any rule. It just depends on the context you're teaching in. It depends on the situation you're dealing with, the type of or the level of learners you're teaching. It depends on many factors. So here's a question from Riham: do we have to depend on ChatGPT all the time for ideas, or make space for our own ideas from time to time?
Great question. Great question. I mean, personally, for me, it's another tool I have in my toolbox. So I might decide to use it, but I think over time, we just become much better at thinking of these tasks. And I think ChatGPT will probably never create quite as good a task as you will because you know your learners, you know your context. But I think it really does help. If only to just, you might just want to spend half an hour just asking ChatGPT to generate all these tasks, and then that will give you lots of ideas, and you'll remember them, I think, when it comes to actually thinking spontaneously in the classroom.
Yeah, so you don't always have to depend on ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. Sometimes you have to make up your mind and come up with ideas because you are the one who knows his students and their needs, and you have to respond to these needs. So everyone, feel free to visit the links I dropped in the chat box for the 6 types of tasks. And also I dropped an article, a link for an article on LinkedIn about dealing with emergent language in order to understand it. I've also dropped a link from the Teaching English with the British Council website. It's about understanding the dogma or the dogma approach in ELT. So, do you have any other questions?
Just one thing, actually, I do have that mini tasks generator, but I've forgotten where I had it on my computer. So if you just give me a minute, I'm happy to
Yeah, sure.
find it and then I'll put it in the chat. It's just a PDF. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, just bear with me a moment.
Okay, so everyone, I've dropped the links again in the chat box. Feel free to visit them and read more about dogme, about emergent language, about the six types of tasks in the task-based language teaching. And if you have joined us late, a little bit late today, don't worry because everything is being recorded. You can always get back to our YouTube channel and find the recording. Listen to it again, and if you have any questions, you can, leave them in the comments, and we will be answering all of these questions.
Right, okay, I have found it, so I should be
Cool.
able to put it in the chat.
So it's a nice coincidence, Dylan, because first time we connected together was when you read my article on emergent language on LinkedIn.
That's right,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's when we decided to connect. Yeah, that's right. So Dylan has just sent you in the chat box his mini task prompt generator. So feel free to download it and use it. So it's right here in the chat box. I'll
But again, you
also
can create
include
your
it.
own, but it will give you an idea. It'll give you a
Yeah.
model maybe that you can work from. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have any if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. I think that I've seen a question
Yeah, young
here
learners. Hmm.
by Shayma. Yeah. What about young learners? Sometimes if you took what annoys them, they don't like that or not participate in the talk or the activity. What to do in this case?
Hmm.
So what do you mean by taking what annoys them?
Um, I must admit, I haven't actually worked with young learners for a few years. Oh, I've suddenly become the host. Oh, Mohammed has disappeared, perhaps. Ah, he's back. Well, um, thank you everyone for your comments in the chat. I hope that was useful. I'm quite lucky. I have the ability to be quite flexible in how I teach. So I'm able to use a sort of dogma or unplugged approach quite a lot. But I think most of us can find these 5 or 10 minutes in which we can do something a bit more spontaneous. Hi, Mohammed, you're back. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. So just look for my name. Actually, I can put that in the chat box. Yeah, I can make you host again. Okay.
So I don't know what was happening with Zoom actually. It might have been fasting, all the time. That's why it's acting like this. So yeah, um, so that was a very fruitful presentation, Dylan. It was a real pleasure having you here with us today. And I hope that we, extend talking about this maybe in my podcast, Cast interviews. We can, answer everyone's questions about creating mini tasks about the Dogme ELT approach. So yes, so it's always nice to share knowledge with people and listen to educators who always have different perspectives, right? And different insights. So again, let me thank you and thank everyone here who attended today's session with us today. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next Sunday. And this time I'll be talking about life skills integration
No,
in English. Yep. I'll
good
talk about
topic.
my book. So yeah. So yeah, I'll be talking about integrating life skills in English language teaching. So I'm looking forward to seeing you next Sunday at 9 o'clock Cairo time. So again, thank you everyone, and see you in another webinar. Thanks, Dylan,
Thanks, Mohammed.
and
Thanks, everyone.
goodbye.
Bye bye.